We are only 2 weeks away from the start of football season, so join me for the Hall of Fame game between the New York Jets and the Cleveland Browns, as we'll be live streaming the action then. More preseason streams to be announced soon. And now, on with our feature presentation. The city of Buffalo and the city of Toronto have an interesting connection when it comes to sports. It's roughly 100 miles between the two cities, but even though the cities are about 2 hours apart, they could not be more different. One is in the United States, and the other is in Canada. One of them has a population under 300,000, and the other one has a population hovering around 3 million. One of them has a hockey team that is historically bad, and has never been Stanley Cup champions since man walked on the moon. And the other one has a hockey team that is historically bad, and has never been Stanley Cup champions since man walked on... Actually, wait a second, that part's exactly the same. However, that's not to say that there isn't a bizarre relationship between the two cities. We saw it during the 2020 and 2021 MLB season, when the Toronto Blue Jays were barred from playing games in Canada due to COVID-19, and they called Buffalo their home city. We saw it during COVID in the NBA, when Buffalo was trying to get the Toronto Raptors to play there on a temporary basis, although they ended up playing in Tampa. And most notably, we saw it with the poorly planned and not well executed Toronto series, where the Buffalo Bills would play a few games a year at the Rogers Center in Toronto. Although that's a story for another time, because there is a lot to dissect there. However, even though you might know about the Bills and their relationship with Toronto, and the city's relationship with the most populous city in Canada, the idea of a player on the Bills actually living in Toronto seems, well, rather insane. To live in a completely different country and play for the Bills? To make that commute every single day, cross customs, and do all of that? You don't see players on the Los Angeles Chargers or the Los Angeles Rams living in Tijuana. You don't see guys like Geno Smith and Kenneth Walker on the Seattle Seahawks living in Vancouver. You don't see guys like Jared Goff on the Detroit Lions living in Hamilton. You get the idea. Living in another country, making that super long commute, and doing that every single day seems ridiculous. Well, this man right here that you've been watching this whole time is a defensive end by the name of Chidi Ahanotu. And back in 2002, when he was with the Buffalo Bills, for some bizarre reason, he did just that. And the reason for why he did it, and how much it cost him in the grand scheme of things, well, it might surprise you. Because this is the story behind Chidi Ahanotu, and the man with the strangest commute in NFL history. Before I talk about exactly what Chidi Ahanotu did with his commute just about every single day, we need some context to understand just who Chidi Ahanotu is, how good he was, and why he even signed with the Buffalo Bills in the first place. And oddly enough, this is not the first time I've done a video about Ahanotu, as a long time ago, as in more than 3 years ago, I talked about a bizarre controversy involving the man on the 1999 Tampa Bay Buccaneers, when he openly called out his starting quarterback, Trent Dilfer, following an abysmal offensive showing on the opening day of the season. To learn more about that, click the card in the upper right corner. However, controversy aside, Ahanotu carved out quite the career for himself in the National Football League, especially since he was a 6th-round draft pick all the way back in 1993. In fact, of the 6th-round picks from 1993, you had a few that never even played a single snap in the NFL, and all but 8 of them were out of the NFL before the start of the 21st century. So Ahanotu did awfully well for himself, as outside of 3-time Pro Bowl tight end Frank Wycheck, you could probably make the argument that Ahanotu was the most successful 6th-round pick of that 1993 class. Today, while there are a lot of great Tampa Bay Buccaneer defenders from that era that get remembered, and rightfully so, like Warren Sapp, Derek Brooks, and Ronnie Barber, Ahanotu was an unsung hero, and was one of the best defensive linemen in the history of the franchise. In his first 9 seasons in the NFL from 1993 to 2001, with the first 8 coming with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers from 1993 to 2000, and the 9th coming with the St. Louis Rams in 2001, he started 120 games and racked up 33 sacks. Most notably, during the 1997 season, he really showed when he had 10 sacks, which was not only a career high, and was not just second on the team, only half a sack behind Warren's sack for the team lead, but made him just one of 19 players in the entire NFL that season to have double-digit sacks. He had more sacks in 1997 than great players like Leslie O'Neal, Derek Thomas, Michael McCrary, and Neil Smith, just to name a few. Long story short, Chidi Ahanotu was an awfully good player, and was a guy that was a firmly established veteran in the league by this point. And in the 2002 offseason, this team right here, the Buffalo Bills, were looking to bolster up their defensive line, and it wasn't too hard to see why. The Bills went 3-13 in 2001, boasting the worst record in the AFC and the 3rd worst record in football. And a big reason for that was their anemic play on the defensive side of the ball, seeing as they allowed 420 points, or an average of 26.3 points per game, which was the 3rd worst total in football, only better than the Indianapolis Colts and the Detroit Lions. And a big reason for that was some shoddy play on the defensive line. The Bills mustered up just 34 sacks, which was 21st in the league, and they had no standouts in terms of guys who could rush the passer. Aaron Schobel was the only player on the team to have at least 4 sacks. The leading guy in sacks ranked 43rd in the NFL. The second top guy on the team, Keith Newman, had 3.5 sacks, which was 97th in the league. When your top 2 guys are 43rd and 97th, that's not going to get it done. On top of that, there were 5 players on the Bills to record at least 3 sacks in 2001. 4 of them, in Aaron Schobel, Keith Newman, Bryce Fisher, and Kendrick Office, were under the age of 25. The Bills not only needed help on the defensive line, but they needed some veteran leadership, which is why it made complete sense as to why during the offseason, the Bills decided to sign this man right here, Chidi Ahanotu, to join their team. It was a natural fit in so many ways, especially after the St. Louis Rams, coming off of an NFC Championship season, opted not to re-sign him. Though the meetings between the sides were not super long, there was a mutual understanding that this would be a logical place for Ahanotu to play, and for the Bills to be the 3rd team that he joined. Said Scott Langley, who was Ahanotu's agent, "It was a short visit, but I think it was productive. He and defensive coordinator Jerry Gray, who was a teammate of Chidi's when the two played in Tampa Bay, have a great communication between the two of them, and based on his visit, Chidi will be embraced by the Buffalo Bills family." And that's what he was really looking for. The deal got signed shortly after, and just like that, Chidi Ahanotu was playing for the first AFC team of his career, as he was now a member of the Buffalo Bills. Now, it was time for him to find a place to live. So you would think that the logical thing for a player on the Buffalo Bills to do would be to find a place to live that's somewhere in Buffalo, right? At the very least, find somewhere close to Buffalo where you can call home. You wouldn't accept a job in Seattle and live in Portland if you had to commute between the 2 cities every day. It just wouldn't make sense, and wouldn't be very practical. But here's the thing with Chidi. On one hand, he's Nigerian. His father was born there, and his grandfather was actually a tribal chief. His name itself is Nigerian. His first name, Chidi, translates to, "There is a God," and his last name, Ahanotu, translates to, "All men are created equal." But on the other hand, at no point in his life had he ever lived outside the United States. Even though he's Nigerian, he was born and raised in California, went to college at Cal, and then obviously lived in the USA for the past decade, playing in the NFL for Tampa Bay and St. Louis. Sure, he had been to places internationally. He'd been to his home country of Nigeria twice, and he vacationed once or twice in the Caribbean. But the 32-year-old Nigerian had never lived outside of the United States. And this was something that was important for him, because he wanted to be like his dad and his grandfather, and wanted to experience a new culture and experience what other countries besides the United States had to offer. With that, when Chidi Ahanotu signed with the Bills, he signed for one main reason in particular. Sure, they were offering him some money, and sure, they were offering him a pretty good role on the team, as he was going to start. But most importantly, in his eyes, they were offering him a chance to see the world based on the team's location. Because Chidi Ahanotu decided that it would be a good idea to not live in Buffalo, or not anywhere in New York State for that matter. Rather, he was going to live his life in Toronto, Canada, across the border. And I don't mean that he bought two homes, with one of them being in Toronto where he would spend the off-season, and one in Buffalo where he would spend football season. No, I literally mean that he would live in Toronto full-time, live in a completely different country, and commute to Buffalo for practice and for work. Now you're probably asking a very logical question about all of this. How the heck did this work? Especially considering the fact that this could be a problem during the winter, seeing as it snows. Well, get ready for this. 5 times a week at 5 a.m., or 6 times a week if the Bills are at home, he would wake up and take a limo from his home in Toronto to Buffalo, making the roughly 2-hour trek, plus customs. And again, that can be longer depending on the traffic. He had the back seat of the limo converted into a bed, so he would sleep during this drive. Then, barring a few exceptions where he would stay in an apartment in downtown Buffalo, he would make the drive back to Toronto, stay the night there, and then he would do it all over again the very next day. Said Ahanotu on this strategy, I'm an enterprising type of guy. I just wanted to see what it was like. I wanted to see what else there was to offer in this world, other than the American view of things. So far, what I see of the Toronto area, I love. It's cultural. It's a metropolitan city. Everything you need is right there. He also added on this, I have always wanted to experience life in another country. So I said, well, if I'm in Buffalo, I'm too close not to do it. I wanted to see how life is outside of America. As Americans, sometimes we think this is the best way, or the only way, to live. No other way can be good. Ahanotu also loved the African influence in Toronto, saying on the city, I'm Nigerian, and the African presence in Toronto is huge. Everywhere I turn, there is someone from Egypt or Somalia. Just being around those people feels good. It's really a deep-rooted thing inside of me. I really identify with that. And in his eyes, this commute was no big deal, even though his teammates, many of whom live anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes away from the stadium, like most people do, called him crazy for this. Said Ahanotu, my teammates think I'm crazy. But you know, the 2 hours I'm driving to Toronto, they go home and they're sitting on the couch flipping channels or playing video games. So hey, it's not like I'm losing valuable time. I know I'm different. To me, this thing is like no big deal. I mean, it's 2 hours there and 2 hours back, and you're doing it sometimes 6 times a week, so do the math on that, and it's not 2 hours, but that's literally a full day. But whatever floats your boat. And I'm sure you have another obvious question about this. And trust me, it's going to blow your mind what the answer is. How much did all of this cost? How much does it cost to hire a limo driver, and a limo solely for you, with the limo driver's sole job being to drive you 310 miles a day from Toronto to Buffalo and back? Well, Ahanotu paid $10,000 Canadian, or in American dollars, $6,373 a month for this service. That's right. He was paying over $6,300 a month just to drive from Toronto to Buffalo, instead of buying a house in Buffalo and spending his off-seasons in Toronto. Let's say that he did this 6 times a week for the 17 weeks that the season went on, plus 3 weeks in training camp after he signed, so 20 weeks. This meant that in 2002 alone, he spent roughly $30,000 on just commuting from Toronto to Buffalo and back. He reportedly signed for the league minimum for a veteran with a decade of experience, so $650,000, meaning that he was spending just under 5% of his yearly salary on this crazy commute. And remember, this doesn't even take into account any other expenses, any of his own transportation that he did in either Toronto or Buffalo, any of his living expenses in Toronto or Buffalo, or any of his expenses with his family, seeing as he had 2 kids. Still, if it worked for him, it worked for him. At the very least, it's a unique story. Plus, let's be honest, there are way worse things that athletes have blown $30,000 on. So if he was happy in Toronto and was experiencing another culture and his worldview changed because of it, then good for him. Will we ever see anything like this in the NFL again? Probably not. And for what it's worth, what you're watching right now is Chidi's only season in Buffalo, as he was on the San Francisco 49ers in 2003, following a 5-sack season. So he was unable to live in Canada the following year. You can't exactly commute from Toronto to San Francisco. Having said that, if nothing else, Chidi Ahanotu holds the distinction among the thousands of players to ever play this sport for having the strangest and craziest commute of all time. Because in 2002, I don't know what was easier for Chidi on a daily basis, passing by offensive linemen or passing through customs. Get your official Jaguar Gear 9 merchandise by going to jj9shop.com, and be sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel out a lot. Join me every Wednesday night where we'll play NFL Trivia for cash prizes at 9 p.m. Eastern over on Twitch. To learn more about the history of college football, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To learn more about the history of Major League Baseball, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 7. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.